I believe we went live very. Let me just see. Yes, we are live actually now. So, hi everybody. This was a very sudden technical glitch that was quickly solved, but welcome to the Citizen Cosmos Interchain debates. And actually, I believe some of it was even recorded live, some of me speaking over the phone, but that should not be a problem. So, if you're seeing that, in the recording. I'm sorry for that, but yeah, we are here. So this is a privacy debate, and we have with us four guests today. We have Jaya from the NIM project. She will probably, when she's going to present herself, explain a little bit about what NIM project does. But if you're interested, we have had interviews with them before. Very cool, and not only about NIM, we have a couple of interviews with Jaya on Spaces as well. One. So very cool opinions. We have Chris from Namada. Also, check out what we have done with them before in the past. Very interesting and cool project. A lot of internal, a lot of depth, so to speak, a lot of rabbit holes to dig when it comes to Namada. We have Will from ZK Validator. ZK Validator, a very old and big validator, not just across, I believe, the Cosmos ecosystem, but more. Also, we have Edward, which is just kind of fell off from who represents Huobi, and Huobi are also a validator on the Cosmos ecosystem, and again, also not only. And we would and yeah, Edward is coming back and on. I believe he's probably having some problems. He was saying at the beginning that he is getting a signal problem. Hopefully, he will be able to join us. There we go. Edward, can you hear me? Yes. Yay. So we're going to start, and I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves, and maybe this will help us as well to solve the issues, and then we're going to jump in straight to the question. So Jaya, hi. Do you want to give a small intro about yourself? And maybe, when you're going to have the intro, maybe each speaker, I'm going to ask you to say what privacy means personally for you and for your project. So maybe Jaya, let's start with you.
Cool, yeah. So my name is Jaya, and I have the pleasure of working as part of the NIM project. Have a very fancy official title of Chief Strategy Officer, but all that really means is connecting a lot of the kind of deep, technical work that's happening in the NIM team to broader debates and current affairs and public affairs out there in the world, and make it meaningful for people in their everyday lives. That's how I perceive it in any case. And to explain a little bit about NIM is the core of the NIM technology is what's called a mixnet. And what mixnets do is they provide a kind of shroud across all internet traffic to make sure that patterns of communication cannot be traced. So what that fundamentally does is it solves a kind of problem at the core of the internet, which basically means that even when you have end-to-end encryption, anyone who's observing the network can actually trace traffic patterns as it travels across the network and use that to reveal all kinds of information about people and de-anonymize people, and not just people, but also infrastructure, which is interesting when it comes to distributed infrastructures in the kind of general blockchain space. So in short, what that means is NIM protects people's IP addresses on a basic level, and then it also protects people's metadata, so the metadata of communications, i.e. what time you're sending a packet across the network, from what device, from what location, and so on and so forth, which otherwise can be revealed simply by doing some analysis of traffic patterns. The way that I tend to think about privacy and the specific way that NIM addresses the privacy problem in the digital space, because when we talk about privacy in terms of digital technologies, it's a hugely complex space, and there's privacy problems throughout the entire stack, right? So if we're talking specifically about what NIM achieves, the way that I like to think about it is really addressing this issue of mass surveillance. So a kind of, addressing the question of how surveillance when it comes to the entire network really operates at scale. and addressing that at scale. So, providing a kind of, let's say, a mass privacy solution to the problem of mass surveillance, which is built into the internet at its core, both technically and in terms of the business model itself. I would love to go into all of those different areas a little bit more, but I'm guessing that we're going to do that later in the conversation. So I'll happily pass on to Will or Christopher or Edward.
Will, let's go with you. Thank you, Jaya. And yes, we will definitely present a little bit yourself. And the same question: what does privacy mean for you?
I'm Will. I'm one of the founders of ZKV, which is a mission-driven validator that's been around for 3.5, 4 years now. We're one of the top validators on Cosmos, but also on lots of other. And what we mean by mission-driven is that the reason that we set up and the single cause that we champion is in trying to see across the different blockchains where we run that. And we do that in a lot of different ways. But essentially, it's looking at the fact that although there's a common thread that most people, or a lot of people working in, care very heavily about privacy in terms of building and the tooling available, especially over the last few years, there hasn't sort of focused on it. And it's often something that falls by the wayside because of other concerns, which might be just building and getting ecosystem adoption, which is already very difficult for building applications on blockchains. And so it kind of falls down. And we're basically trying to change that. We do it through educational events, Cosmos in Privacy series of events. The last one in person was in Prague about a month ago. We also do lots of online events. We on many different chains where we're active and run workshops with developers or builders who are trying to do anything relating to privacy. We have done a lot in the past of funding teams and also giving grants processed through Gitcoin, and also sponsored many things like the Z Prize. Basically a whole range of things, including like legal reports, basically trying to figure out what's stopping people from wanting the app-based applications, because ultimately we think that that's what's needed. Adoption of blockchain technologies, digital assets. And so if we don't solve that, ultimately this sort of industry will fail in becoming what we want. So we're trying to champion it on that.
Thank you, Will. And I think it was a bit modest. I know you guys do a lot more other things. You have some. Well, anyways, we'll if you want, we'll get into it. If not, up to you guys, of course. Edward, I'm gonna go up to you next. I hope you can hear me. Edward, would you like to present yourself a little bit? Tell us a little bit about what you do in Huobi and what does privacy mean for you personally? If you can hear me, of course. Dun, dun, dun. Nope. Again. Okay. So we're gonna go to Christopher first. To you, Chris.
Sure. Thanks. I'm Christopher. I've worked before on IBC for the Cosmos project, and I now work on Namada and Anoma. For the sake of limiting the number of rabbit holes in this discussion, I'm just really going to represent Namada, and would love to talk about Anoma another time. Right, Namada, just to give a quick explainer, is an upcoming layer 1 chain built on Tendermint, connected to both Cosmos and Ethereum ecosystems, designed to provide a shared privacy set for like existing assets in the multi-chain. So we've designed to make it as easy and simple as possible for users to bridge their assets from Ethereum or from Cosmos-based blockchains using IBC to Namada and keep them in one shared privacy set. And the reason this is important is that one shared privacy is like win-win good, right? It's a sort of public good that the more users use the same privacy set, the more privacy everybody gets. And Namada does a lot of work on kind of bridging and economic incentive design and stuff like this to try and make that outcome sort of politically realistic. I actually, so this take might be slightly controversial. I actually don't like I think the word privacy is the wrong word. I'm 100% for privacy technology, but to me right now, the primary risks in deploying privacy technology are no longer technical. I think they used to be technical. Now they're like public communications risks. And in public communications, And even in technical design, I think privacy is this like awkward word. Maybe this is an English specific problem that doesn't happen when you go to other languages. I think it might be better. But privacy describes like a property of an interaction with respect to an observer, right? Like my interaction might be private to one observer and public to another observer. That's not like, from the system designer perspective, that's not the thing that you want. The thing that you want is like information flow control, right? You want to give users the ability to know and choose exactly where their information goes.
Yes,
and from the perspective of
let's get into
from the perspective of social, like why do we want privacy? It's also this very weird thing, because privacy is this sort of property of one specific interaction, but what we typically want is like freedom of association without sort of implicit threats everywhere. So yeah, information flow control is a very boring word, and I'm going to lose this like debate, but I'm still going to make the point anyways.
You know what? I think the original question sounded like, with the beginning, the first sentence, I just skipped it, was supposed to be, let's take care of the semantics. So I think you were just like nailed it pretty much when you went there. Edward, you're back with us. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah, sorry.
Yay.
I mean, someone usually to calling me, so stuck the tab. Yeah.
But let's try. Can you please present yourself and tell us what you do for
Yep.
Huobi, and tell us what does privacy mean for Huobi?
Okay. Yeah, thanks for hosting. This is Edward. I'm currently the general manager for the Asset and Computer Center for Huobi. So I think everybody knows we do the M&A, go back to Q3 last year, and we did the restructure. And so far we have 4 main business units. So I'm currently heading 2 main business units within the group. For privacy side, I think it's very important for the centralized exchanges like us, right? But the interesting angle for this question is because sometimes we need to dealing with a lot of centralized regulators. If, for example, there's a case, the very basic scenario that maybe some cases happen, and some client their tokens being hiking, or maybe how to say some criminal asset they how to say top up into the centralized exchanges, and usually the regulator or maybe the client they may come to us and say, hey, Huobi, we need help, right? So this is a suspicious token, suspicious deposit. We need you to lock up the account like this, blah blah blah, right? So that's a very interesting scenario, because from the privacy protection angle, we who cannot do that unless this is the brief and order from the centralized regulator with a formal document support. But from the user interest protection side, we have to do something, right? Otherwise, your real client asset will be how do you say destroyed, or you mean your clients real asset will be stolen by the hacker, and they will do the trading and withdraw the money, right? So how to find a proper solution on that? One side, we still follow the privacy protection, but on the other hand, we still find a way to protect the real user's asset. That's become a very how do you say interesting case for us. Yeah, so that's the thing we I wanted to discuss. But so far, we already have a SOP for that. So for example, we can trying to frozen the asset for a certain time of period. But still, for the user who are facing the challenge from the hacker, they need to find a proper support from the regulator to get a fully proven, so that we can help them on the left process of the case. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Edward. And you know what? I can see here we have a small chat here for the viewers, for the listeners, and we don't talk there that much, but I can definitely see. I'm gonna say a proposition here from Jaya to get into more about the semantics, which I actually have. I want to, but I'm gonna kind of like the first thing before we get, because I think it will lead us to there. I think what I'm gonna ask now will actually lead us into what privacy is. So I'm gonna ask a question. It's not gonna be directed at any of you. I guess it's a lot related to what Edward does, but yeah, let's see how we can unroll this, and if we can take it to what really privacy means. My questions might be a little bit over the place, but I'm gonna try and help myself, and I know that you guys understand me. So, so what do you guys think? Where is the line between public safety and privacy of the individual? I mean, Edward has just mentioned already hackers, and this is, I think, where this is slowly coming in. And not just that, also I want to understand what you think about how much responsibility should users or projects take onto themselves in order to protect whether it's public safety or privacy of the individual. So it's kind of like two questions in one. It's like, where is that line between public safety and privacy of the individual? And should projects or what type of projects should protect that public safety, or should they not? And it should be the users who should be responsible. So I don't know who wants to take on that first. Jaya, maybe?
Yeah, I'm
pick on
happy
you.
to. Yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Let's get into it. No, don't be sorry at all. I was literally about to put my hand up. I actually think that something that Christopher said in his introduction kind of speaks to this a little bit, because it's a little bit, it comes back to that problem of like when we start talking about privacy, it's very easy to set it up as if like either everything is private or everything is transparent. And it's just simply not a good description of what the problem is, because the problem is, it has more to do with who has access to what information under what conditions, right? So the reason why, surveillance all of a sudden became a huge issue in terms of digital technologies was very much like, okay, linked, of course, to the Snowden revelations and so on. But what was it exactly about the Snowden revelations that was so shocking to everyone? It was the fact that, the United States intelligence agencies had access to data about people all over the world with no court orders or anything like that, simply by virtue of control over digital technical infrastructure that the rest of the world depended on, right? So it has more to do with, let's say, it has more to do with the ability for specific people who are able to control access to data and able to control large-scale infrastructures that is completely asymmetrical and unjust, even from a legal perspective. So I think we need to be careful. I mean, that's why I'm also super keen to actually start working out some other words to describe this thing, because it paints the wrong picture of where the problem lies. Where the problem actually lies in the question of control over the digital infrastructure and control over who has access to what data under what circumstances. There is no such thing as perfect privacy. There's no such thing as total transparency in any circumstances ever. It's always a question of power and access, and working out the correct balances around that is much more important. Yeah, I mean that would be, and it's highly geopolitical for that reason too, right? When we're talking about kind of regulators that want access to this and that data, or people, or like consumer protection agencies or whatever else. Again, it has to do with, we're talking about global digital infrastructures, and we need to understand also the geopolitical dynamics behind that, and geopolitical dynamics around like control over data infrastructure. So, for example, a few weeks ago, I was running a panel at the Computer Data Privacy Protection Conference in Brussels. And on the panel with me, I had Andres Arauz, who's one of our advisors at NIM. And this is of like super core political concern to him, because he's a politician in Ecuador who used to also run the central bank there. And his main concern right now is the data of payments. And the fact that digital payment systems actually entail that you have payment data from Latin American countries that sit in servers and whatever that are accessible to the United States and to other kind of governments and other government agencies that threaten the kind of sovereignty of these countries, right? So you start to see that like this is about like where data centers are located. This is about who runs the platforms. This is about who has direct relationships to those companies that run the platforms, and the power asymmetries that come from that, which is essentially the issue that we're talking about when we're talking about the problems of privacy, right?
Before I'm gonna let somebody else take on that, I'm gonna like follow up for you to what you said. At which point does it become the responsibility of the society to take over? Let's say if the user, in your opinion, of course, let's say we're talking about privacy of the individual here, and we can talk about polycentric conceptions as well. I think Christopher will probably have something to say about that, but like for sure, at which point does it happen?
Exactly. So the privacy, again, we say privacy of the individual, which is what we want to achieve, right? But we should not confuse that with the individual therefore being responsible for their privacy, because the individual uses collective infrastructures. So it is the collective infrastructures and, all the kind of forces that shape those collective infrastructures that need to provide for privacy as the default. So that's it's very much the approach that we take at NIM as well. It's not, we don't believe in the end user having to kind of make all the choices about every single interaction that they have online. Why? Because it places the burden of risk onto the individual, which is completely asymmetrical again and completely unrealistic. Like you as an individual up against some of the most powerful corporations and corporate commercial interests and government interests in the world, having to kind of make your, do your little settings, whenever you visit a website or whatever else. It's like, no, I mean, it's simply not how it functions. So, in our opinion, this is not a responsibility of the individual. It is absolutely in order to protect the individual, but it needs to be something that's, privacy needs to be something that's built in as the default into infrastructures. And only then does the individual even have a chance to make a choice, a meaningful choice about how they go about like sharing data or whether they want data produced about them at all.
Okay, makes sense. I understand what you're trying to say there. Anybody else wants to take on that?
I wanted to do a take maybe from a slightly different angle. I think this is a question that you can look at on the scale of like our entire society. You can zoom in as much as you logic applies. And I think if we look in the current blockchain cryptocurrency ecosystem, particularly like the financial ecosystem we're seeing, which could evolve to become something which we see at blockchain space, you have the same dynamic. That the transparency often, which at the moment there's full transparency across most of decentralized finance, people sort of tout as a benefit. I mean, it's a big benefit that you can see, for example, fully how much money is left in liquidity in different smart contracts, that you can see how the logic of those smart contracts work. And that's a benefit to individuals in order to be able to actually see transparent infrastructure safe and that they have that benefit. But then on the other side, at the moment, the individual's data is completely public, record if you can link it to their identity. And so I don't think it's a case where we want to say all privacy is good or all transparent, but that we need to separate who has which impact, how it's segmented and designed. And for example, I think that we have fully transparent infrastructure that for end user interactions, they're private. And that's something which can be built. And I think we're seeing being talked about more specifically in like blockchain DeFi terminology now. So I think like the term encrypted user layer, but with transparent infrastructure is becoming more and more common as a concept. And I think, for example, Aztec is like using that terminology a lot. And so that's a concept you can like start. You could apply at a bigger and bigger scale as you think about privacy. Everyone goes back to kind of Jay's point about it.
Anyone else wants to take a bit more? Chris?
Yeah, sure.
Look like you want to add something.
To me, there are two questions here which are really quite distinct. The first question is, what can protocols do? And the second question is, what should societies do? And I think this distinction is important because the first question is a mathematical question. And the second question is like a socio-political question. And the mathematical question is going to have, there are many possible protocols, but you can kind of class them and reason about what things are possible and what things are not possible. And the second question is have different answers for different societies and different people and different cultures and different preferences. There's not, as with my protocol designer hat on, when you say what should the devs do for the users, I think there's a certain limit to what I can know, as in, like, I don't know what different societies would set as the trade-off between different points along the spectrum of privacy and transparency for certain kinds of interactions and certain kinds of aggregate statistics, stuff like this. The only thing I can do as a protocol designer is design a protocol which gives users more freedom. And this is all that privacy preserving protocols do. So let's call the other thing a forced transparency protocol. I think it makes the distinction clear, right? So Ethereum is a forced transparency protocol in that, as a user, you can choose whether to use the system or not. You still have a choice. But if you use the system, you have to disclose all the data to everyone. There's no more fine-grained choice that you can make, right? So relative to a privacy-preserving protocol, forced transparency protocols are removing an element of choice, right? The only thing privacy-preserving protocols can do is add that element of choice, back, or it was really supposed to be there in the first place. But they can add that element of choice back so the user can make a more fine-grained decision, right? I want to use the system and send this person this payment, so I'm disclosing information to them, but I don't want to disclose that information to everyone else, right? No one, if you don't want to disclose any information to anyone, you don't need to use a blockchain. Like, you probably don't need to use information communications technology at all. It's kind of what it does. So I think there's that question is important to understand as distinct because to me, because it helps us articulate to users and potential users and societies and regulators, to everyone, what it is actually that protocols do or do not do. Protocols do not make things private. They give users the ability to make more fine-grained information disclosure choices, right? So then there's a second question of what is a good balance? And I'm going to take off my protocol designer hat and put on my citizen of a democracy hat, right? And as a citizen of a democracy, I think one thing that I keep in mind is how do we make the governance powers in this democracy kind of resistant to capture? We want some things to be public. We want some kinds of public disclosure. We don't want one entity with force and cops and stuff to see everything all the time. That seems like too much, right? So there's a balance to be found here that's in between. And to me, it seems like some amount of aggregate economic statistics being public is probably generally useful. If you reveal the total number of coffees bought per month, it doesn't do a lot to compromise individual privacy, and it maybe does something to reveal to us that we should be worried about our caffeine habits. Maybe that's just me, but we would, at least see some kind of useful data in the aggregate statistics. So I think there's a really, but that negotiation is quite localized, right? It's not, protocol designer hat. It's not up to the protocol designers. Democracy citizen hat, it's up to the democracy citizens, right? And hopefully their representatives in government engaging in some kind of dialogue to figure out what sort of long-term equilibrium is the right one to draw.
Joking aside, I can really think of dystopian examples, what you could do with that data. Seriously, I could really think of bad things to do with the data. If I knew you were drinking 15 cups of coffee per day at a certain time at certain places, there's a lot of things I could do with the data, So it's about the adversary here, I think, trying to but yeah, I understand totally the
I don't drink 15 cups, just for the record.
But I think Christopher's point was exactly the fact that
of course
you don't want to know that the individual drinks 15 cups of coffee, but if you know that 20,000 people on average drink 15 cups of coffee a day, then it's you're talking. It's a kind of general bit of information at an aggregate level. It doesn't threaten the individual, but it tells us something potentially useful for the society. I think this question of aggregate is quite interesting. Maybe we can get into that as well.
But before that, Edward, would you like to have a take on that? I'm sure your take might be a little bit different. I mean, I'm assuming for you guys, well, I don't want to assume, but I'm assuming that for you, well, in a sense, I'm not going to say anything, Edward. I want to know what is it for Huobi? What do you think about how much responsibility should users have to protect their data, and whether or not public safety is more important than privacy of the individual, or are they equal? What's your take?
Yeah, I mean, so from a centralized exchange angle, I think user first is always privacy is always the first, because we play as a centralized institution, right? So we have to protect, any data or any information from our client, unless there's some, enforceable, forcible, regulator or any forcible case happen, or either the users, they want to share their data to, for example, if you see any social media promotion, sometimes you'll see some kind of KOLs or trading leaders who within the communities, they like to willing to share, how many token they have invest, how many volume they trade every single day, right? So this kind of data which they think they're okay to share, then we are okay to support. But for any cases, protect the user privacy is always the first priority for us. And secondly, we have to follow the local compliance and regulations, because the compliance and regulation trend cannot be adjusted. Everybody see that, right? So you see US, you see Japan, Korea, Europe, you see Hong Kong, everywhere is going to that direction. Even for the on-chain ecosystem, it will be very similar, right? No matter for the DeFi protocols or decentralized exchanges, you have the responsibility to follow the local regulation and compliance. So we have to do the similar job. So that's the second thing. And for the public safety, the only thing we used to face before is I don't know if you guys know that it's a P-Gala case which happened before. So because if we just do some centralized operations, everything is cool, right? So if we have strong security system, if we have strong risk control system, and if we have strong wallet and custodies, we can definitely help the client to cover their privacy and assets. But sometimes, as a centralized institution, we also have to do the interactions with on-chain stuff. Like if, for example, we list a couple of projects. I think NYM we also support you guys as well. I think we support over 600 tokens, right? So sometimes maybe some asset initiator, they face some challenge from their on-chain stuff. And when we do the wallet integration, we may have the asset deposit from on-chain. Then if there's something happened, then we have to to work out with the regulators, and sometimes maybe we may have some influence on the users' privacy as well. So that's the case. This is a special case we have to discuss separately. But for the others, user privacy is always the first, and regulating compliance request is the second. And for the public safety part, or it depends on the case, right? So if they need us to do the thing, and if it's follow the regulation and compliance, then we will do. Yeah. So that's the conclusion.
Thank you, Edward.
Yep.
Thank you, Edward. I think there is a comment here, and I think it kind of comment from one of the viewers. Sorry. And I think it was more related to what me and Chris we were just saying. I was making like a semi joke on it, but it seems that that semi joke is turned into a comment. I like it. So, and it actually relates to my next question and relates to what Edward just said. So I'm going to try and put it all together. So before Edward started to speak, and when I was joking about the coffee, and then there was a comment here from one of the viewers. The problem is, what can the governments do with the collective data? And you know what? Like, all things aside, if we were to not to take the coffee thing, but let's take now a lot of that data, more data, which is not individual but statistics, But if we map enough statistics, then basically, and the way it relates to the next question is compliance is growing, and compliance is growing in proportions like, because it's bullshit, but it's growing quickly in terms of Web3 and outside of Web3 as well. And where is that stage where we're going to go tip that point of where even that statistical data about how many cups of coffee, of course, in brackets, an individual on average is drinking, becomes a danger to the Web3 industry, and the data. I mean, we can go into like Cambridge Analytica right now, but I don't know if that's the point. But I see Jaya's already gone.
Yeah. I'm like ready
Let's
to
go.
go.
Let's go then. Let's go.
I thought when you started to say statistics, I thought you were gonna actually go in the direction of AI, because that's actually, you know, the next logical step, right? I mean, to me, like right now, I'm doing a bunch of kind of like research looking into, you know, what is, you know, where are we now when it comes to like privacy in relation to the digital technologies that exist right now and coming, you know, for the next like 10, 15 years or so. And the kind of, let's say, the adversary of for privacy for me is like more, it has more to do with AI than the NSA at this point. I mean, the NSA is still there, but it's like there's something else going on here in terms of the core adversary of privacy. And it's an extension of mass surveillance as we know it from the kind of like past couple of decades, because, you know, that mass surveillance was what aggregated all the data to be able to train the types of, you know, large language models that we're used to now and are getting used to, and the kinds of all the problems that come with that. And that is really the question of the aggregate, right? That's really the question of scale. The fact that you have, you know, you can perform statistical analysis on large scale data sets, which, you know, even I've talked about this in some other talks before, where it's like, for me, it's like there's going to be a weird privacy washing of the digital space, where, you know, we're going to see things like zero knowledge proof cryptography enable, you know, large scale training of models on data that's supposedly still private, but will still enable the same types of social control, targeting and profiling that we know from traditional surveillance. So I actually think that, yes, whoever the viewer was that posed this question, this is absolutely true. It's not just something that's coming in the future. It's not just a hypothetical problem. It's a problem right now that statistics is used against us, and it's used against us in a systematic way. And we might not feel it, all of us at the same time altogether, but it is targeted in the sense that my data is used to feed algorithms that then go on to target other people elsewhere. And that's the nature of mass surveillance. That's the nature of digital surveillance. That's quite different from what we know from physical surveillance. So, and that's also why, you know, taking the kind of collective approach is so important, because it's a collective problem fundamentally. Like the fact that, you know, me as an individual user, I choose to use, you know, Signal and VPNs and NIM Mixnet and all these things. It doesn't really do much to address the whole problem if we're not able to actually make privacy a kind of systematic public good across all the full stack. Because fundamentally, like I said, you know, even if my data is private, the fact that there is statistical aggregate data available, you know, out there about, you know, from lots and lots of other sources, I can still be targeted and profiled in ways that can harm me, showing up on, you know, whether it has to do with, you know, immigration controls or credit ratings or loans or educational, what's it called, prediction, you know, like the problem of aggregate and statistical surveillance is very much present, already here, already now, and it's only going to get worse in the future. And AI is kind of like the derivative of that, the kind of at the forefront of that. So for me, this is the work that we need to do now as people that work in the privacy space, is really start to understand where our bits of technology actually fit within the kind of emerging AI industry.
I cannot not help to add in. I didn't think so. Sorry, Will. Sorry, I cannot not help when Jaya says something. I have to help. I have to add a little extra thing. I'm sorry, Will. I really apologize. To follow, but then I have a small follow-up question for you before Will. But it's a tiny one, really. Is it the AI is the problem, or is it the compliance that's surrounding the people that making the AI having to share their data with governments and with evil statistical agencies? It's not the AI that's the problem, is it?
Well, I don't know. Compliance, it's such a weird thing to say that compliance is the problem, because it depends compliance with what regulatory framework. I mean, like sometimes I think compliance is great, you know, like other times it's shit. That's not really the issue here. The issue is like looking at, you know, real world harms that happen as a result of technologies. And, you know, in many ways, compliance is a little bit like, beside the point. Like, it should ideally be an ally, and that's what we should try and kind of strive for at all points. But like, that's a battleground, you know. I absolutely see it as a battleground. It's a battleground that's playing out like in very real ways in the UK right now. There's the online security bill that is trying to be pushed through, and you know, so like that's not kind of the main crux of the question for me. The main crux of the question is like, you know, is AI the problem? I mean, even AI is not the problem. There's interesting things that can be done with AI, especially if we, as people that are creating privacy preserving technologies, actually get in there and make sure that we're part of shaping the future program for AI, the future kind of vision for AI. I think we should absolutely do that. There's a lot to be said from the privacy community. But the way that it's developing right now absolutely is a problem. So what I see is like, how to put it, evil statistics is the problem. Statistics that get used to cause harm. Yeah.
I think this
Thanks.
question, which is that, I mean, there are a small number of entities mainly that can do this sort of evil statistics based on the data they have. That's mainly governments, big corporate entities, a few others. But actually, because of the sort of requirements to actually do that kind of analysis and use them, it's quite limited. And I think like the point of AI and maybe new techniques like ZKML and the ability to work on data that you don't have yourself without having an almost democratization to our data. It sort of, because most people do, maybe rightly or wrongly, trust the governments, maybe trust more than they should some of these big companies. But when you get to the point that you can use open tools to achieve similar things with much less access to data, that's where it becomes even more scary. You're basically democratizing access to do evil things on our data, and we have to work even harder to limit the amount of data that's available in order to prevent that. And so I think that kind of ties in, but it's sort of it's an acceleration of the same thing.
I guess more or less that was I was trying to kind of push to into that question. But you know, if nobody's complying me to share my evil data in a certain specific way with a certain specific agency, then you know, like, is my thing that was completely private evil? I know it's a 2, 3, even more of a 3-way and stick.
Can I get into that, or should
please,
I can also let Christopher
please
go. But this is the other kind of point around like the future of privacy washing, right? Like, I'm trying to like keep an eye on like how is because we're seeing now an appetite in like the big corporates to actually advertise on the basis of privacy, right? You see like WhatsApp being like, yeah, super private messaging, this and that, right? So like people are picking up on, and also Apple, of course, and people are kind of picking up on the fact that there is a demand for privacy in some way or another. But like, I think what you were kind of saying, whether like compliance and actually the sharing of the data with a government agencies where the problem lies, I don't think that's where the problem lies, because what's likely going to happen, or what you see happening already, is that large tech companies are actually using using privacy as a way to consolidate monopolies. So like, they're like, well, we provide super private messaging, this and that, whatever. We don't share it with any third party. What they do instead is they share it internally with all their, different kind of subsidiaries, this, that, and whatever. And then that way they use privacy like as a promotional thing. There's no kind of passing of data, this, that, and whatever, but they consolidate their technical monopoly, and they're still able to run their own algorithms on that supposedly private data in order to target their customer base, right? And a customer base of millions, if not billions of people. So I don't know. Again, I don't think the compliance point is like exactly the main problem. But
I think it's interesting that we're getting into semantics again, by the way. In my opinion, it's interesting that twice in the same conversation in privacy, we get into the point of internal compliance, But Christopher, I'm gonna let you, of course, answer in the network, because I want to hear your opinions too. Thanks, Jaya.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think like trying to avoid privacy washing is just another reason to drop the word privacy. Like, let the big corporates have it. I don't want it. But mostly, I wanted to circle back a little bit to AI and your earlier point, Jaya. I think this question is illuminates kind of a dividing line between what protocols can do and what culture can do. So protocols can, allow users to choose to whom and when they disclose their information, right? And they can decouple those choices so users can disclose exactly what they want. But if we live in a society, right? And in society, you're walking around, you're buying coffee from someone, right? Basically, all of the data here constitutes of interactions with another person. And if most of the people in society choose to disclose a bunch of data from their interactions with whether or not they're privacy preserving machine learning models, it doesn't matter that much. If you live in a society where that's the cultural norm, the technology, it can't do anything to change the social equilibrium, right? I mean, it can allow for some amount of individual exit, which I think is important, but as long as the physical surrounding environment, everyone carries these portable surveillance devices with them, right? Whether they're portable surveillance devices or portable sort of privacy preserving mesh networking devices depends on what software they're running and what buttons we press. And that, those choices are in the hands of users, and how we think about what it means to make those choices individually and collectively is culture, right? It's not technology. It's not mathematics technology. It's kind of how technology gets used. And I think that it's, I absolutely agree that there will be lots of attempts to privacy wash things and to kind of cloak stuff in AI. And I think that there's a particularly scary threat there in that it is possible to strike some kind of more privacy preserving balance that doesn't individually send my data to everyone, but that still allows for a lot of individual protection. Like if everyone I interact with, takes the data and kind of anonymizes it so that they, maybe they don't know it's exactly me, but they take all the data and send it to some model, then the model can build a very accurate profile of me, right? And it will be able to recognize me purely on the basis of that model, even if it doesn't say Christopher. So I think there are definitely a lot of dangers there, and the only way to avert them really is to kind of build both the technology to enable it, that's a prerequisite, but also kind of the cultural understanding of, frankly, I consider it rude. If I'm talking to you and I go and post that data on the internet, that's rude. And I think we kind of lost that cultural norm a little bit. I think 20 years ago that was common. No one would have people are still they're frustrated if you post screenshots of your DM conversation, but definitely there's been some slippage in that cultural norm, and I think we probably should bring it back and update it and kind of reflect on how it needs to be adapted to this modern technology landscape. But it's important.
Hanging was also good. No, I'm joking. No. Let's not go that way. Sorry, wrong conversation. No, I'm actually gonna go back to what you're saying now, Chris. But before, I just want to hear Edward. I'm gonna give you the question again, and then we'll go into society a little bit, because this is actually exactly the next thing I have. Edward, if you can hear me, what do you think?
Yeah.
Then what's your take on? A point where is there a point where compliance there's too much compliance for the Web3 industry, and that will kill it off?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good question, because for Huobi, we started the business since 2013, right? So and during the two rounds of the bull market, go back to the 2 rounds before, I think during 2018 global expansion, and we're dealing, I think, almost every single compliance or regulator on the world, and yeah, so the challenge part is, especially for the for centralized business, the problem now is the regulator, they use a very traditional financial way to look at the business, and they think that the crypto asset or crypto service has a higher volatility or higher risk. So that's why a lot of conservative regulators, they don't want retail clients to join the game. They just, for example, we have head office in Singapore, right? So MAS from Singapore, in the very beginning, they are quite open for that, and they even drafted the regulation to open for retail clients. But the problem with FTX, right, and make a very big impact to the industry. So a lot of the conservative regulators, they don't want to do that. So they just want to say, oh, this is very high risk Even you look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong is quite open right now. But the thing is, they start from very, very fundamental service like the sport trading, and they don't support staking. They don't support LSDs. They don't have NFT derivatives. They don't support any perpetual trading, leverage, everything. All these stuff they don't support at all. So since they don't support the license the people are applying, it's really hard for the centralized operator to survive because they cannot make the money. And a lot of different type of the target audience they can join the market as well, because there's always different type of the clients on the market. Someone they are retail, someone they are institutions, someone they are high network clients, and they have different preference on the different product type, right? Someone like sport, someone leverage, someone like to have structured product, index product, right? But majority of these products they are not regulated at all, so these guys cannot join. So that become quite a big challenge for centralized institution when we're talking about regulation or over regulation, right? That's on one hand. On the other hand, for the on-chain surveys and protocols, the problem right now is I think is one thing is the tech how do you say the tech challenge, and also because why people like to join the Web3 or join the blockchain world, because the blockchain the crypto always has the charming part of decentralized governance, right? But if the centralized government or regulator they join the game, they will all say, oh, you have to provide me any data I like, you have to have dedicate people or maybe ultimate beneficial owners, right? So when any cases happen, I can find this guy, I can sue him, or I can let him to pay the responsibility. So you have to find a balance point, but it's really hard. And if you go too centralized, then the community they don't like it, because why we join the blockchain, why we join the crypto world, because we want to decentralize, we wanted something which some system is purely organized or purely managed by the people. But if you are not such centralized, then it will become a very big challenge from the tech wise to lack the centralized regulator to how do you say that to manage the on-chain risk, right? For example, the hacking, right? We still see a lot of hacking cases, security cases happen. We still see a lot of how do you say that the washing solution like Tornado Cash, right? All these solutions always happen cross chain, right? So that become another challenge. So I think that's the two main parts. Do you need to discuss and trying to all the party need to sit down together and always have keep moving or keep discussion about the solution till the day. Maybe I think it's not mature enough, but I think it's just very close. Maybe need another 2 or 3 years, or maybe another round, and we can find a balance point for centralized institution and regulation and on-chain ecosystem and regulation. Yeah.
Thank you, Edward. I think that the case of Tornado Cash shows that it's not just centralized regulators that are in danger, right? It's everybody's in danger, and I think this is what I meant by I think the dangers of compliance, because sometimes you're trying to comply with one law, but they kind of stick at another one which has nothing to do with the first one, but they will find a way to put them together. And the case of Tornado Cash, I mean, not Tornado Cash itself, but the case of the founders of Tornado Cash, Roman in this case, it shows it very well, because I personally know the family, and believe me, the best people you could meet, the nicest people you could meet. But end of the day, nobody cares about that, because there was something else they were uncompliant with. And I guess this is where I was coming from. But I agree with all of you that it is definitely about the society, and this is where all it starts. And this is what I'm going to bring to next. There's also a couple of comments here, such as user safety protection should be through education rather than restrictions, and this should be for all fields of life, not only investment world. We need self-sovereign identities and better ways to maintain control of our data, and all of that kind of brings me to this is from different viewers, by the way, but this is kind of bringing back to what Jaya and Christopher have been talking about. And But here's the question. I don't understand what the problem is, to be honest, because there are a lot of comments about in our field of work about blockchains are a one-way ticket to 1984, or I don't know, blockchains will lead to the most dystopian society because, and when you ask why, people say, oh, because we are as a society not educated, and actually, Jaya previously sent a link also here because this is also related, because it says here privacy for end users, transparency for the infrastructure. A quote from an article, or sorry, the name that was written. But and this could, anyways, long story short, but that's all bullshit in a way. What I mean is that our society does know what privacy is. If you look at a house, there is privacy at any home. Doesn't matter what country you live in. Doesn't matter what polycentric conceptions you want to follow. Doesn't matter what society you live, whether you live on Mars or under the ocean or in China or in the USA. We all at our house know what privacy means, regardless of whether we keep it or not, because each person has a very different conception of privacy. So is it really about the education? That's what I'm trying to say, because where is that line between I am dystopian because I am uneducated, and I am dystopian because, well, if I don't do that, I'm gonna go to prison, and I rather somebody else go to prison for me. So I know it's not a but I'm trying to understand in a way what we do here as a society to improve everything we've been saying, because if we are able to keep the privacy in our houses, and anybody is, even the most dystopian person, I can guarantee you of that. I don't know what experiences as speakers, I hope you all had good experiences growing up, but I don't know what experiences you had. But if anybody unfortunately has had those experiences, I can assure you they were probably private and kept out of the eyes of others, right? Because nobody knows that you're beating your child up at the house. Nobody wants the neighbors to know that. So they are still aware, even though they're dystopian, of what privacy is. So sorry, Jaya, you were going to go there and I carried on my microphone mode. So I'm going to now mute my microphone mode and go to you.
No. Yeah, sorry. Now you sent my mind on a different trail of thought when we were talking about like the potential of the shit that can happen behind closed doors, which is not the direction I want to go in. I want to go in when you're talking a little bit about the, whether there's a need for more education or not. I think, yes, there's a need for more education to some degree, but I also think that you're right in the sense that there's a lot of norms that we do carry with us that has been, part of human society evolving over thousands of years that we can also carry through into the digital space, which are, basic norms. Like, for example, if I'm having a conversation with my friend, I kind of assume that it's just between me and my friend. I don't assume that there's like 1,000 companies that are listening to every single word that and tracing my eye movement and checking my temperature and this and that while I'm having like those conversations, right? So there's definitely, some norms that we can kind of draw on and use in order to kind of reassert our kind of sanity in this mess. But I also think that there is, not on the educational front, I mean, education kind of assumes that we all know what people need to be educated in already. I actually think that there's a certain amount of like new norms that do need to be developed, and a certain kind of maturity that needs to be developed around how we engage with digital technologies that's just not quite there yet. I am personally an optimist. I think we are capable of doing that as humanity. I think the challenge with doing that in terms of the digital future that we're facing is just the sheer speed at which things are changing. That makes it quite challenging. It's not like a set of norms that can evolve over hundreds of years. It's a set of norms that we need to like, this year, man, like, let's get into it, right? So it does demand quite a lot of deep thinking, quite a lot of good conversations like the one we've had today. I have kind of a few mental models that I like to work with. I mean, one of them is definitely the one that I posted in this blog post here, which is, it's a kind of evolution from a kind of cypherpunk saying, which is transparency for the powerful, privacy for the rest of us. What's interesting about that saying is that it requires that you understand who the powerful actually is in a given scenario. And it's quite interesting to also think about that in terms of distributed infrastructure, right? So what I'm trying to argue in this particular blog post is, when we have distributed infrastructure, the powerful is the infrastructure itself. Why? Because it mediates between the relationships of everybody that's actually using that system. And that's why the infrastructure needs to be transparent. And that's why people need to be able to understand how their interactions are being mediated, right? So there's a set of principles there that we can work with. And then the other way that I tend to think about it is, I have a background in geography and digital geography specifically. And so like when I think about whenever I read like technical papers and I read through like new kind of cryptographic schemes and stuff, I think I imagine it as spaces, and I do imagine it as cityscapes and houses and doors that you unlock or lock and windows that you close or open, and so I think thinking through our digital technologies as a set of kind of cryptographic spaces that require really careful design, and so far have not had very careful design, and their design have been driven very much by either geopolitical or commercial interests. And that's where I think like the blockchain world and crypto space has something interesting to offer, because we have removed the business interest from the business interest of surveillance from the equation, which means we can have much more meaningful conversations about how we deal with data. So for me, this is that's why it's so interesting having, or so fruitful to have these conversations in these spaces, because it's not tied up in the business model. The business model lies elsewhere. We've kind of solved that to some degree. In some kind of funky way anyway, let's see. But yeah, so a few bits and pieces of thoughts there.
No, perfect. I know the question wasn't very, directed, not straightforward. I wanted. Let's go then in the order we already kind of picked up on. Will, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of sort of draw on a different part of what you said, which is kind of related still. And I think it was the almost sort of joking illustration of, we're used to having privacy in our houses. It's a norm for us that if someone comes and spies on you in your house, you wouldn't find that acceptable, and no one in the world would think it was acceptable for people to spy on them in their private home. That almost illustrates why it's so scary and dystopian, where we've already got, which is different. In the sense, there were real struggles about having the same level of privacy on digital communications, and it was normalized that your digital should be able to be decrypted by governments and other agencies, and you shouldn't have to encryption. And we're seeing the same now with move to like cashless society, where if you need to use cash, it's almost now becoming. We have had hundreds of years of using cash or more. It's becoming sort of seen as a thing to be paying for things with cash instead of with your credit card, where it can be seen by governments and other and companies. And so that those societal norms, which we have taken for privacy in your home, just go in seconds on digital technologies. And that's, I think, the most terrifying thing around why, as Jaya was saying, like, it's such a quick change, and you can't take for granted, even with hundreds of years of history around privacy being normal, that we preserve that in the societies and in the systems that are being built in the digital space. And once you've lost it, it's very hard to go in the reverse direction. And we're already seeing that now with, especially in, for example, the UK, it's almost impossible in most places to pay in, and it's getting harder and harder, and you're getting treated with more and more suspicion. And if you try and do it, and going the other way seems quite hard now.
Please, Christopher, I can see that you let's go.
Yeah, I share the concerns. I think I have a little bit more optimism, because I think that the cultural norm or norms and intuitions are in many ways still accurate. It's just that the technology doesn't respect them, right? So people still, they kind of expect privacy. They expect data locality to match like locality of the thing that they see. So if I'm in a group chat with 5 other people, mostly I think about it as being with them. And, unfortunately, we've just been living in this realm of collective denial, where like my group chat wasn't really with them. It was like with them and the NSA, and then later with everyone who hacked their servers and bought the data. So my group chat was kind of with everyone. So in some sense, we kind of lost this distinction of spaces, but it still looked like we had distinct spaces, right? So the cultural norms have, they are sticky, but the other reason, like, why do we have group chats in the first place, right? Like, if we built an internet that reflected sort of where the data was actually going, there would just be one global chat all the time, right? And we kind of have that. It's Twitter, and it has some interesting incentives, right? But we made, the interfaces like displayed something else, right? So the cultural norms, I think, have been, and most of the time, like, well, most group chats don't get disclosed, right? Or most people, there's still like a lot of data. Not everyone can read it, at least not until you have an LLM. So I think that that is a reason perhaps why cultural norms haven't changed. But we can realign the technology with the impression of locality, right? So if we have like privacy preserving encrypted group chats, privacy preserving payments, generally just different privacy preserving information transmission and coordination mechanisms, and we match them to the interfaces, then the intuitions will be correct, right? And then the cultural norms don't. I mean, a group chat is like kind of like, it's like you treat it like you're meeting your friends at school, and I mean, most of the time you just wouldn't reveal that conversation to the outside world. If you have a secret club with your friends, it would be you would be breaking the rules of the club, right? I think that's not a stretch from a cultural norm perspective. We just need to make the technology kind of correctly, and the interfaces correctly reflect it. To your point, Jaya, I mean, one reason this hasn't happened is that typically business models have been oppositional to that, as in it was in the interest of companies to lie, or at least mislead by omission as to where users' data was going, because if users knew, they would be horrified, right? And they would leave and stop sending their data to this service which trained all its advertisements on it or whatever, right? So that oppositional interest plus the flexibility of technology, right? It's possible to make an interface that looks like one thing and it does another thing. So there's a lot of choice in that relationship, and that the agency to make that choice is held by the companies developing the software, and the companies developing the software had no reason to want to tell users the truth. So I think that has changed, and some new cultural norms will need to be developed, but also the best way to do that is just by like experimenting a lot and letting a kind of like sort of diverse local experiments with privacy preserving technology where the interfaces do match what the technology is doing, and kind of users are presented a picture of reality that really maintains informed consent as best as possible. I think we'll see a lot of flourishing and kind of interesting different alternative cultures develop pretty quickly.
Can I just quickly jump in there? I totally agree, and I think there's something hugely beautiful that can come from working with those interfaces in meaningful ways, where people can actually data traceability is a thing, right? Like it's supposedly somewhat possible, and I think for users to actually just see where their data, like not just a kind of list of companies that are buying your data, but literally trace it as it flows through the market, and where it ends up at the end of it. Like, does it go to a medical center? Does it go to train like automated drone strikes? Does it go to, do you know what I mean? It's like this is the stuff that makes this meaningful and makes like data actually and how data is used meaningful for end users. I had a really great conversation with the people at Jensen actually just a couple of days ago. They're doing this distributed AI, like machine learning kind of system. That's super fascinating stuff. And they were telling me that it's actually possible to for LLMs to unlearn. So you can like extract, you can do the whole trait, you can trace all the way back and then extract it and then make them unlearn what they've learned from your data, which like to me just like that's like super fascinating stuff as well. So I think there's a lot of like interesting things going forward around like data governance and the ability to choose when and how and for what purposes your information is being used. That like there's some definitely some super positive directions we can go in, and let's just hope that the kind of incentives align to actually make that happen.
And I have a couple of comments here, but I'm afraid that I'm going to start taking into another direction. So, Edward, please, your opinion on the last sort of question.
Yeah. I'm here. So the last question regarding the recent issue about crypto, right? Or
well, in terms of, I would like to more to comment in terms of we're talking about education. point,
Education.
during the conversation, we were saying that education could solve all of that, and then I was saying that, well, here is an example with houses, and we are all educated that privacy is good, and Christopher even gave a even better example with friendships. When we talk about friends and we have a secret, we only get upset when one of our friends tells the secret to somebody else. So that education already kind of exists. So I guess it's not question, but more of what you think, what would solve those problems we're talking about. You mentioned already also a lot of problems when it comes to centralized operators, and we can also see that it's a lot of different operators are also having those problems. So how do we solve that? If it's not compliance, if it's not education, or maybe it is compliance and education in your opinion, or none of these, what do we do basically?
I think number one for education is more focused on the user side from my angle. But the user, it's really hard because the user is too big, right? And everybody's talking about mass adoption. Every venture crypto arm is talking about the next billion users who enter the market, right? So if there's a billion of users to enter the market, it's really hard for you to educate them. It's really hard. You cannot make everyone to be so professional, so tech driven. They are clear about everything. For example, if we go to China, a lot of crypto traders or crypto holders, they are just middle aged uncles and aunties, right? It's really hard for them to understand even about ZK. What is ZK? What is layer 2? They don't really care about it. They just care, oh, this is a product. This is a new asset which I think I should invest, right? And this is the future. That's the only thing they know. So I think it's really hard to educate you, to leverage all these problem solving solution to leverage on the retail clients their own, how do you say that, knowledge upgrade. I think it's really hard. I think that the main responsibility definitely came from the operators, the industry players like us, and also the regulator. So regulator need to be more tech driven, to be more advanced and with the tech, because if you look at a lot of centralized regulator, they're still a few years behind the current trend, right? So we're talking about BRC20. We are talking about ZK roll up as service. We're talking about privacy, all these stuff, right? But a lot of regulators, they don't even know about it. They're still back to the traditional financial way to understand about a product way, KYC, ML. They are talking about these things, right? I think one of the thing is the regulator need to take the responsibility and quickly catch up with the latest trend, and quickly set up with the new maybe rules. But I know it's challenge. It's not easy. But it's an ideal assumption. But that's one thing. I think they have to do that. On the other hand, we have to continuously enhance the standard of the industry player. I think that's a good trend which we can see, because in the past the crypto market is very small, right? Only few pioneer or community leaders join the game. But right now, after the last round of the bull market, majority of the institutions coming, majority of the top level campers and the professors joining, right? So that I think the standard is higher. It's become higher, but we still need to let them know and to continuously promote it. So I cannot say this is the like education, but that's the two main participants who really need to take the responsibility. Only by this, we may have a chance to solve the problem at the end. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think to me, before I'm gonna ask the last kind of question to all of you, because it's gonna take time. It's kind of a question from half question from a viewer, half a question from me. But before that, I just want to say, one of you mentioned cash, and I mean, I understand that in the UK the situation is a bit different, because my mother lives in the UK, and recently she was here and she was talking about the same thing. But in the rest of the world, cash is still the most private tool to use. If I want to be private, I will use cash. And it's ironic that instead of saying governments should be public and individuals should be private, we live in a world which is exactly the other way around. The individual should be, it's okay to not be able to account for $2 trillion in your budget, but it's not okay not to account for $600 in your private account. And I think as long as that is the narrative, we're going to have a problem no matter what we do. Because if people are okay with $2 trillion, which is their own money, getting lost, and okay with, reporting for $600 to somebody who can lose $2 trillion, I think we're going to live in a world which is still going to go for a long time to get to the point of that the government should be public, not the individual. But anyway, sorry for kind of like doing that. Again, this is a personal opinion, of course, and as long as usually I don't do that, but because it's a debate, I feel my freedom of my right to to do that. I'm sorry. So the question is here, and it's kind of I'm gonna go half my question, half of what it says here. My question was, what is your advice for projects, for new projects building out there, whether small, big, centralized, decentralized, doesn't matter. Advice to projects in terms of regulating their users. And the question that is here, and I think we can combine that. Maybe each one of you can say what privacy project or technology you are intrigued or influenced by, and please don't name your own. It does actually say that here. So, so once again, what advice you have? Privacy project or technology you think is cool apart from your own, and what advice would you give to anybody else about regulating users? And I'm not going to carry on that sentence because I can, but it could go either way. But I want you to, with your answers, to go whichever way it will go. So Jaya, please, we're going to start with you.
What do you mean by regulating your users?
Sorry. Okay. But I am going to rephrase that then. Imagine I'm starting a project tomorrow, a crypto project, a blockchain project. Now, all of you have been talking about privacy, and some of you have projects which you guys interact with compliance in one way or another, or you use certain data, or you don't use certain data, you read certain analytics of the users, or you don't read. So what would be your advice to a project, let me specify that wants to upkeep, Web3 and flourish it? What would be your advice to them then? What to do with users in terms of data and privacy? Should they straight away start to regulate the user? Should they not do anything like that? Should they be more like Tornado Cash? Should they be more like I don't know, BTCE, whatever? Again, sorry if it's vague. Please hit me, and I will make it more narrowed down. But basically, two questions: one, advice to projects in terms of privacy, and one, what privacy technology you find interesting.
I mean, ideally, when you're building some, software or technical services of one form or another, you're there to serve users, not to regulate them. So that would be one thing. And then I would also advise to take the principle of data minimization very seriously. Holding data at this point is a risk for companies and for projects. There's no reason to put yourself into that risky position. The more data you hold in a variety of ways, the more you open yourself up to potential attacks, meaning attacks on your users as well. So and then if you think that serving your users is potentially going to get you into compliance problem, then maybe you should look a little bit closer at what you're building and think that through a little bit better. And obviously it depends what jurisdiction we're talking about, this, that, whatever, but yeah, that's generally speaking. And then in terms of privacy projects that I admire, this might seem like a bit of a cop-out because it's not in the web. Basically, I think Signal is I admire Signal because it's it does something very simple that serves people in a very immediate way, and it's very easy to use, and it has strong privacy and strong principles behind it. So I think Signal is very admirable for that reason, and we should strive to that level of usability. It's one problem that I think happens a lot in the privacy space is not focusing enough on usability and serving like there is the problem is that we end up serving the purpose of privacy rather than serving the needs of people. So coming back to the semantics that we started off from, you know, are we building to solve a privacy problem in the abstract, or are we building in order to enable users to do something that they're trying to do in their everyday life, but with privacy? Which ideally it should be the latter thing, right? We should be enabling people to do things that they're trying to get done in their everyday lives, but with strong privacy protections fundamentally. So I think that's why I mentioned Signal, because I think they achieve that quite successfully.
Thanks, Jaya. So advice to software builders in terms of privacy, and one project you admire.
I think going back, or I think on what Chris said earlier on about technology almost not being, there are technologies that can allow us to build good privacy. But one of the most difficult things now is actually for projects to be really clear about what they're trying to achieve and who it's for. And it sounds easy, like it's easy to say, but very difficult advice to follow. But building which is more useful than the non-private or better than the non-private alternative for end users, so that they're choosing it because of those benefits, not because of seems to be where and it's clear that there are lots of benefits to being private beyond just the privacy, and you get that as an addition, but it's hard to figure those out and get first use cases. We're seeing examples in like the DeFi world where you actually want your you want, for example, because you can get better prices and not get ripped off by people using your trade information, and so these solutions and then get the benefits for everyone else. One of the best projects, I think. I mean, Signal's a great example, but for example, something I worry about there is the business model. I mean, something that a lot of privacy projects struggle with. Relying on wealthy donations, is great while it works, but then you can have periods where, and that's a struggle. But something more close to home. Really, I admire the approach that Aztec takes, and especially their previous version, which is actually now, I think, was a really good sort of example of what we should be trying to achieve with a lot of. They allowed you within Aztec 2 to basically hold your Ethereum-based assets, could be Ethereum, stablecoins, and interact with the public decentralized finance systems like staking your ETH or trading, which all those transactions happen privately, but you couldn't see who was making those transactions. So I think it was people to do what they already wanted to do, not trying to create an alternative system, but in a private, encrypted way. And it's a really good direction and example.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess to the first point on advice, I think I might say don't be afraid. And the reason for this is that I think there's a lot of fear, both actually on the behalf of developers and people working in the space or operating custodians or exchanges, and on the behalf of regulators. And I think fear makes it very hard to communicate clearly. And you see it often in the language. So for example, some people say that tornado is now illegal. This is false, right? It rests on a certain misunderstanding of what law is, right? The Department of the Treasury declared sanctions on Tornado Cash. That happened. The Department of Treasury is not the law. They're like some people in the American government that have certain authorities. I mean, the fear is understandable. The American empire uses secret courts and like a lot of shady stuff, but still, they don't get to decide what the law is, right? There's a established dispute resolution process for that, and still, it's ultimately up to like citizens to decide what to do. So I think, we don't want to. It's important not to cede the rhetorical ground too much, right? Like there's a difference between the government and a specific regulator, and a further difference between the law and specific decisions made by specific people. And we live in these systems which have, hundreds of, more than that. I mean, at the very least, thousands of years of cultural memory and building dispute resolution into how we collectively define law, right? And specific laws and how we resolve disputes between parties who don't agree on what the law is or should be. And, you know, we are not, it's not clear to me that we're winning that battle yet, but we're definitely not losing it either, right? We don't live in authoritarian or totalitarian states yet, even if they have concerning trends in that direction. So I think this is like still a very good time to interface with these systems and not, you know, understand what they are and are not, and kind of constructively engage with lots of different parties. On project, yeah, I was also going to say Signal, can't say that now. So instead, I will say Zcash, I think. You know, Zcash is sometimes underappreciated. I mean, they launched kind of trying to build Bitcoin but private and haven't yet really been incorporated into the multi-chain world, though hopefully that will happen soon. But I really respect Zcash for taking a principled stance to privacy, building it into a base protocol, pioneering the deployment of ZK snarks, you know, really from academic theory all the way to production in like 2 years, which is just a crazy timeline. And they sort of kicked off, you know, without Zcash, we would just not be in the position that we are today regarding snarks or privacy. The existence of Zcash is kind of, even if not everyone uses it, the existence of the project and the currency as a demonstration of privacy that is not, you know, US regulators haven't banned Zcash, right? Gemini or whatever in New York, which is, I mean, don't mess with the New York district courts, right? But it continues to, right? They've communicated this very well and kind of established a ground on which the rest of us are lucky to be able to work. So I have a lot of respect for them.
I didn't actually expect to hear Zcash. That was a surprise. Interesting. Edward, what about you? One piece of advice for please.
For the project you set up for privacy part, right?
Yeah, so let me repeat the question. So a piece of advice for any software builders in the Web3 industry in terms of privacy and regulation, and one project in terms of privacy that you admire, and of course you cannot say Huobi, just
yeah, I think for any centralized institution, it's really hard because you always has the possibility for the counterparty risk, right? Even for Binance, even for Coinbase, I think the same. So it's really hard for me from project level. A little bit hard for me to say who is the best player. I think the best player will be definitely in the future rather than now. But that's the very important part. We have to. I mean, every single project owner, they have to is really serious about it. To be friendly, because you know, for Huobi, we did have the venture arm, but we didn't invest in a lot of how to say privacy relevant project, to be friendly. So we cannot provide a very you know, mature solution from the tech wise. What we can do is to let them know there's some principle which the project owner or the founding team, they have to follow up. Number one is definitely the user interest philosophy. So anything with users, no matter data, informations, you know, assets, securities, all these things should be the first thing they need to think about when they design the product or design the infra, no matter what it is, right? And second one is really depends on which area they are entering, right? So if they are entering as a centralized institution, they have to take care of the geographic and the jurisdiction and compliance. That's very important. But if they enter the decentralized world, really depends, because some of the areas still in the gray areas, they still have the way to grow first before they start to have very strong, how do you say that, regulation set up to be friendly. But yeah, really depends on which area they enter. Yeah, so that's the suggestion. Yeah.
Thank you. And what about a project? Do you think, is there a privacy project out there that you admire or inspired by? It doesn't have to be crypto project.
Oh, not to be crypto project-ized.
It doesn't have to be. It could be crypto, could be outside of crypto. Doesn't have to be. You don't have to give an answer. Just if you have one.
Yeah. So far, maybe not the best practice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Edward. Guys, so coming back, we're 90 minutes past as promised. I don't know. I was gonna ask if you want to add something to. I'm gonna narrow the adding down though. Maybe if one of you wants to say something that they think might help, kind of in their last words, let's stick to Web3. Usually I go more broad than that, but the average user, so let's use that stigmatic sentence, to stay more private, and to and anything else you want to add, but maybe to include that, what's your like general piece of advice without like going into a big thing, maybe like some last words on privacy, and maybe if you could make those last words helpful to all of us, like the users in Web3, would be very cool. Again, not necessarily, but if any of you want to, please jump in.
I'm always happy to go.
Yay!
Well, I mean, I would say, like I pointed out kind of earlier in the conversation, I honestly, I do think that this is a responsibility that shouldn't fall to the end user, but I would say that the end user and us as individuals should make it a demand. It should be part of our expectation of the tools that we use, that they're secure, that they're private, and that they serve our interests and not the interests of random people listening in on the conversation, putting everyone at danger. So I think that should just be a basic demand that we have towards the tools that we're using, in a similar way as like when we eat food, we know it's not poisonous, right? It should just be part of like the broad societal demands that we make of the core infrastructures that we're using. I was hoping you were going to end on a slightly different note, which is because I wanted to also
let's change it. Do it.
I'm very interested to hear like the alternatives that people are thinking about in terms of terminology. If we don't use the term privacy, what are we saying, right? So like I recently wrote up another post where I was playing around with the words of security, integrity, dignity, all these things that privacy actually enables, but they don't really work quite good. They're not quite good enough to be a replacement. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what everyone else is playing around with in terms of narrative terminology and meaning.
I'm gonna then pass it on. But before, by the way, there is old. I don't remember in which school of psychology this is applied in therapy, but it's a very very old thing where you take a word and then you draw an even amount of synonyms from that word. But let's say, for example, the word privacy, and then you would write, let's say, 18 terms of what privacy means to you, and then you would put them in random pairs. So let's say the first one would be, I don't know, integrity and sovereignty, and then you would have to think of a synonym of what those two words give to you, and then you make like a kind of football table. So 16, 8, 4, 2, 1, and then instead of privacy, you suddenly come up with a completely different word, which incorporates, but I'm not sure if it's ever been applied to privacy, but I'm surely it can be. Why not? But Will, Chris, or Edward, do you have any like in terms of semantics, any like ideas?
I definitely think it's hard. At least personally, I find it hard to fault, at least in terms of like what it communicates. Talking about like sovereignty over our own data, and I think that is really what we're talking about. Is you as the individual have a choice in your data. It doesn't have to be private, but you could choose to share it with different people. You could share it with everyone, or you could share it with no one. I think that's good in terms of what it like means. I think in terms of how it works in terms of communication, it's confusing and not everyone understands what that means without you talking it through. But I do think that's closer than just privacy, at least for me, to achieve.
Edward, please.
I agree with Will. I think I agree with Will, because I think at the end of the day, why we talk about privacy, because we're talking about humans' rights. I think that's the most important part, right? So for current solutions, the problem right now is still a little bit hard for the user to choose, right? Some of the traditional layer one protocols, everything is on chain, everything is public, right? You cannot protect yourself, and some of the privacy chain, everything is privacy, right? You cannot go to the public as well. So at the end of the day, you should have the right to choose which part of the data you want to go to public, which part of data you want to authorize anyone to see, or any part of data that you should protect yourself and be confidential. I think that will be the ultimate solution. So we probably will have a deal with the Singapore government backed projects, so they will have similar options functions for the users to choose. So no matter what kind of data transfer on their chains, they have the authority. They can choose. That'll be a interesting approach in the coming future. But at the end of the day, I also agree with Jaya before. I think for all the end users, we still need to be careful. And one of the amazing part is anyone, they are really control their own asset and the value, and no matter this value can be data, can be real asset, can be the attitude of voting rights, right? All these things are combined as a value. So as a Web3 users, you should be very, very serious about your value, and so that's why you still need to learn a little bit, knowledge about the tech and about how the ecosystem operates and how to participate. But at the end of the day, as I just answered the question, the main responsibility is taken by the, I think, industry players and the centralized regulators, no matter centralized or maybe decentralized. I think in the coming future they may come up with some decentralized model of the regulators. That's part of the thing I think will be quite interesting to discuss as well. So yeah, I think it will be their main responsibility, but the end users, you still need to be carefully and seriously about the value you hold within the Web3 world. Yeah, so that's the suggestion.
Chris?
Yeah, I would love to dive into the semantics of the word regulators and how it's used in like classical cybernetics, but I that's too deep. So instead, I share the like terminological question. I think the problem might be easier if we split it into two, because I think there are really two distinct concepts that we kind of want a word for. One is like the property that protocols can have. And for me, the closest thing here is information flow control. The property that protocols can have like a boring sounding academic word, and there's existing academic discourse called information flow control, which is like roughly the right thing, right? Is very relevant. So I think, as a protocol designer, that's the discourse that I'm kind of looking to for guidance in prior work, and that combination of words seems to basically describe what I like want the system to provide, right? But information flow control is clearly not a good word for like the thing that people want in society. And there, I mean, maybe the like most neutral word. It's very hard to find words for this because it's not going to be the same thing as the system's property, and there's just like a very mine-filled mimetic linguistic battleground right now in the world, and in part due to all these forced transparency systems. So a lot of words are extremely loaded. Like even the word sovereignty, which I share the sentiment, and I find that in some communities that word is kind of loaded. I think because maybe it especially refers to state sovereignty, or it refers to like, I don't know, autonomous individuals at the expense of the collective or something like this. So I don't know if it's sufficiently neutral, but it's still a relevant word. I think the word freedom is pretty neutral. I mean, it doesn't say anything about like the technology per se, but the technology is table stakes, right? The technology is a tool. Ultimately, it will, what technology gets used in society is not up to the technology. It's up to us making decisions on what tools to use. So, I'm okay with freedom. I mean, I think freedom is a better word to refer to like what we want out of these systems at the social level than privacy or any kind of technical property of the technology. But I'm not sure that it might not be perfect. It's not a word specific to this thing. Like someone could say, oh, I have my other kind of freedom. It's kind of a little bit, it's used in a lot of contexts, so it's not super precise. So maybe there are other options.
The word love is used in much more context. Just saying.
We could use love, you know.
No, I was referring that it's okay for a word to have a lot more than one context. I guess that's you can love your dog, you could love your lover, you could love your child, you could love your job. You know, so
Yeah, maybe if you love your currency, it's like a little too. There is a line to draw.
Damn it!
But...
No love. Like whatever word we end up using, it's going to be a world where we are all more satisfied with what we get. I think, like in a truly decentralized world, there is no place for such things as, okay, no bank should exist, or if somebody wants a bank, let them have a bank. You know, we're decentralized, right? Just let them keep that bank to themselves. But again, I know it's an extreme take. That's not the point. My point is just, I hope that whatever word we end up using, it's going to satisfy the individual. So yeah. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you for everything that you said. It's been, in my opinion, a very cool discussion. Maybe in the future, maybe privacy was woof, and I feel like I could talk another like 50 or 60 or 70 hours just with regards to the topic non-stop, and I'm understanding how many topics there is inside. Hopefully whoever's been listening, it's been useful to you. Please check out all the other privacy discussions out there, not just by Citizen Cosmos. I encourage you to check out a lot of privacy discussions, because there is a lot on the internet, and don't just stick to crypto projects. Go further. It's a topic that incorporates in itself, I don't know, like a whole different, not universe, but types of universes. So yeah, I encourage definitely everybody to keep on studying more, and not just with us, but with any available possible content out there. Jaya, Will, Edward, Chris, thank you Christopher, sorry, thank you very much for all of your opinions. I hope it's the questions have been okay, and hopefully see you next time. And everybody who's listened in, thanks, and thanks, guys.
A pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Pleasure. Yeah, have a nice day. Bye-bye.
So guys, they were quick.